Okay, it is 11:01, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. So thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. We've got a great team collaborating together to provide everyone some advice and insights on current economic challenges and obstacles facing businesses. We're going to cover what's being forecasted for the near future and what you can do around technology to better prepare yourselves and your organization. So some housekeeping items I want to cover before we begin. Quick introduction to myself. My name is Caroline Wood and I work at NetGain Technologies as a marketing administrator, and I am going to be playing the role of moderator today in our webinar. Questions are most definitely encouraged throughout the webinar. You can use the question link to submit any comments or ideas about some of the topics that we're covering, and we're going to try to answer as many as we can in the Q&A portion of the webinar, which is going to be towards the end of our session together. We may also be posing some questions to you within the chat, so feel free to weigh in and share your ideas and opinions. A recorded version of this presentation is going to be sent to everybody after the webinar. It's going to be also made available on our NetGain website. So we will be sharing all of those details in an email that will be sent out within the next couple of days once we get all the materials together. Finally, if you've got any questions after the webinar about the content or topics that we cover, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to meet with you or share some additional information around these business and technology topics and more. So please connect with us about that. So let's get this webinar started. I'll begin with some general introductions to our team who's going to be weighing in on the topics we're covering today. We've got representatives from different sides of NetGain, and they both have background and experience in business operations and in the technology industry. So let's go around the room, and I will let them introduce themselves, their roles, as well as a little bit of their background experience. I am going to give the floor to Kelsey Randhawa first. Kelsey?
Thank you so much, Caroline, and I'm excited to be here with all of you today. As Caroline said, I'm Kelsey Randhawa. I am the Chief of Staff at NetGain. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, don't worry, most people aren't, but it's just a fancy way of saying that I'm a thought partner to the CEO. I work on various strategic projects that go across various functions, and I also work on mergers and acquisitions. But prior to working at NetGain, as Caroline said, my background is in strategy and operations management. So I've spent the past 6.5 years at McMaster-Carr, which is a multi-billion-dollar industrial supply distributor. And I held various roles there, from warehouse operations to product management to software engineering and even merchandising. But I'd say the common theme was finding ways to empower people, improve processes, and also using technology along the way. And I'm very excited to be joined by my colleague, Jake Shifrin, who is our Director of Growth at NetGain. So I will pass the microphone to you, Jake, so you can give an introduction.
Thank you, Kelsey. Also excited to be here and talk to everyone today. As Kelsey mentioned, my name is Jake Shifrin. I come from a finance background. I've spent the last 9 years working for several cybersecurity, digital marketing, and IT companies. My roles have included consulting, management, both internal and B2B sales and marketing for small, medium, and enterprise businesses. I'm currently the Director of Growth at NetGain, where I work in tandem with the sales and marketing departments focused on net new growth.
Thank you, Jake and Kelsey. So now that we've introduced the team, let's move into the actual content of the webinar. So today we are going to discuss some of the major aspects of what's been shifting within the U.S. economy that has businesses and organizations rather concerned about some economic risks that could impact their performance in 2022 and beyond. We are not economic experts, but we all have recognized and witnessed several shifts in the U.S. economy and acknowledge some potential risks that could face businesses in the near future, NetGain included. So to start, we're going to delve into what exactly is being forecasted for U.S. businesses based on feedback from the financial industry, some recent trends we've been experiencing in the job market, and even supply chain challenges. Surprise, surprise, it's still going on. And then we'll delve into our suggestions around operations and where you might be able to find some synergies and alignment to increase efficiencies for your business. And this in turn relates to some IT solutions and practices that can further strengthen your posture to weather incoming economic storms. So before we begin our conversation, I want to gather some of your feedback. So I am going to post a poll quickly. And I want to get some of your recession predictions going. So if you'll take a moment to answer the question, we are going to see what everybody's thinking about the some of these economic predictions that have been hitting the news. Oh, this is very interesting. A couple more seconds and then I'll close it out. Oh, now I'm seeing some variety. Maybe I'll wait a few more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to close it out and I'm going to share the results. So hopefully everybody can see the screen and the poll. So it looks like the majority of our attendees today are in line with Elon Musk and that we're already in a recession, but some of you do anticipate one coming in the maybe like longer term future in terms of the next like 12 months or even into next year. So very interesting with that. So let me go back to our webinar now, back on schedule. So let's see. So I'm going to first begin our discussion by reviewing what is being forecasted for U.S. businesses, really in the news and a lot of news media outlets that we have. I'd like to preface this conversation with a recent quote from a CEO within the financial industry, specifically JP Morgan Chase. That hurricane is right out there down the road coming our way. We don't know if it's a minor one or Superstorm Sandy or Andrew or something like that, and you better brace yourself. So looking specifically at some financial forecasts, we're witnessing market fluctuations, interest rate increase, and shifts in consumer behaviors that are in alignment with a lot of these changes in terms of the market and interest rates. So with inflation on the rise, people are getting hit on multiple fronts, from gas station to the fresh produce aisle, clothing prices, entertainment. It's simply getting more expensive to be alive in 2022. So, I mean, even just this past Wednesday, the Fed announced an interest rate increase of 0.75%. So I've got some friends who also work in the housing industry, and so they're already feeling that, and it's impacting us across the board. So Jake, I'm going to toss this over to you first. Can you talk a little bit about what interest rate increases could mean for businesses?
Yeah, sure, Caroline. As we see a rise in interest rates, we're seeing a correlating rise in inflation, and that means everything will become more expensive. Now, if you're cash heavy, you're fine, but if you have to borrow, then the higher interest rates on loans are going to hurt you. Also, if you're a publicly traded company, then you're taking a hit due to inflation and that fear of a recession driving those stock prices down. Inflation is also causing the materials your business needs to increase in price. The next question is if you as a business can then pass those higher costs onto your customers. Salaries are another topic of discussion as employees will begin to request a pay bump to accommodate that increase in expenses that they're incurring due to inflation, and they can pass on to, gas prices, food prices, the cost of living, rent. And if a recession does take place, we may begin to see mass layoffs as an attempt to cut costs to allow businesses to stay afloat. In addition, companies that have less money to spend, they'll delay their purchases of materials needed for the products and services that they sell. Essentially, interest rate hikes force people to spend less because they have access to less liquid capital. Demand for most businesses' products and services decreases, which leads to fewer purchases from those consumers, which means less money in circulation ultimately.
Lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. So Jake brought up a lot of great points about different aspects of how some of these financial shifts are impacting, different aspects of, a business operations. Kelsey, can you weigh in on what NetGain maybe has been seeing in this regard with financial trends?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think we're experiencing many of the phenomena that Jake described, but there's two primary pain points that I'll double tap into. The first would be on the rising cost of input side. We're seeing overwhelmingly that our costs are rising month over month, year over year, and it's forced us to have renewed scrutiny over what our costs are. We're seeing that many of our vendors and suppliers are passing through price increases to us, oftentimes without notification. So we've had to scrutinize our P&L and our invoices in order to catch those and find ways that we can either renegotiate those rates or finding products that we can drop so we keep our costs under control. And I'd say the second area where we're definitely feeling squeezed is on the labor cost side. And we have actually slowed down our pace of hiring in response to both the rising cost of labor and also anticipating a decrease in upcoming revenue overall. So we're expecting slower growth in the second half of this year.
Thank you for that, Kelsey. And another fact that plays strongly into economic forecasts for the remainder of 2022 and beyond in the next year are trends in the job market, which Kelsey and Jake both kind of touched on, just a few seconds ago. Here are a few statistics that I'm going to have Kelsey discuss for us a bit.
Maybe before I even jump into these statistics, I think it's helpful to ground ourselves in how far we've come. So I'm going to ask everyone to transport themselves back to a time you may want to forget, but April 2020, height of the pandemic, unemployment rate was sitting at just under 15%. What that meant is that there were too few jobs and too many job seekers. We've seen a complete reversal of this. Now sitting here in May, June, the unemployment rate has gone back to pre-pandemic levels, just under 4%. And what this actually means in terms of number of jobs being added is there are 2 jobs posted for every single job seeker, which means it is a very competitive job market. Candidates have more options than ever before. And, I keep reading the news, I keep reading various articles, and I keep hearing the phrase, the war for talent. And it does feel like a war. It feels like we're in the trenches at NetGain, and it's getting harder and harder to both retain talent and also to attract talent. Jake, I don't know if you have anything you want to add here.
Yeah, Kelsey, following on what you said, hiring has not been easy, and I'm sure everyone's seeing it on their end as well. Typically, you're working with a recruiter to find someone that fits your criteria, and even then, you have to hope that candidate hasn't already taken a role with another company before you can even extend an offer. As Kelsey pointed out, when there's more jobs available than candidates to fulfill them, it makes maintaining staff even harder as well. We're finding that more candidates are shopping for the best offers, and for the first time that I've ever seen, candidates are actually ghosting us. And I think it's kind of that grass is always greener on the other side mentality. Even once you hire a candidate, you may find that they aren't a good fit, and even if they are, they may get burnt out. They may want to leave because they don't see any opportunities to advance in their current position. And there's a multitude of reasons that can lead to you wanting to get rid of your current employee or them ready to move on. The good news from an employer standpoint is that we expect fewer employees to job hop as they hunker down to weather this storm. And we're feeling that, and we're actually slowing down our hiring, slowing down our pace of hiring as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jake and Kelsey, about job market. Yeah, it's been a very interesting, I would say, few months, but it's been a couple of years, interesting times to say the least. Moving right along to another challenge is supply chain. Supply chain disruptions continue to be a major obstacle as the world economy recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. Recent global political shifts, yes, I'm specifically talking about Ukraine and Russia, and the pandemic itself, particularly in China recently, they even went through, another lockdown to kind of realign their people and the health of their, different communities. But these are putting additional strain on the global supply chains. In the US, we've been seeing reports on baby formula shortages, new vehicles still sitting in lots waiting for chips. Some appliances are hard to come by now, and I'm having a harder time finding sriracha at the store. So you never know what's going to be the next thing that's in short supply and high demand. So unfortunately, it seems that supply chain challenges continue to be a running theme in 2022 and will potentially continue on into next year in 2023. Kelsey, can you talk about some of the ways this has been impacting businesses over the past maybe like few months specifically?
Be happy to. I would say any business that has a physical product that they need to move to some location, in some ways it's facing delays or facing challenges. That might be you're unable to actually finish your product because you're waiting on some component like a semiconductor, or you have businesses who do want to order products, have been able to order products, but that product is just sitting in a warehouse and freight and not actually making it to the end destination. Like the way that we've experienced this at NetGain that has been painful is we can't invoice for products until it's shipped. And things that used to take less than a month to ship are now taking 3 to 6 months. So it's, for us, the way that we've been trying to combat this is by better forecasting out what our customer needs are, thinking through what can we order and pull through farther in advance so that we're able to make the purchases and then people are able to get the product at point of need, knowing that there's going to be some variability with when we're going to be able to get it to them. I'd say the other thing we're seeing though with that is more and more we're seeing customers abandon orders because of the long lead time. Though I will often say sometimes there's poor substitutes and there's really nothing we can do to expedite. So those, I think, are the toughest cases for us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're also seeing on the tech side is an issue with hardware procurement. We're seeing massive delays and back orders. However, it's slowly getting a little bit better. The problem is people want things yesterday and we simply just can't meet those demands.
Yeah. And while it may seem like the world is hitting us with bad news and new roadblocks at every turn, there are many ways for businesses to create some new opportunities out of these obstacles. So here is a quote from Harvard Business Review that I want to pose to the audience. And I think it positions this next segment into more of a positive growth mindset angle for our discussion. So recessions are a high pressure exercise in change management. And to navigate one successfully, a company needs to be flexible and ready to adjust. So Jake, can you discuss some ways in which businesses see some of these variables and shifts and uncertain times, uncertain things, more as an opportunity for businesses?
Yeah, sure. And I think that quote is spot on, suggesting companies need to be ready to adapt. We've talked about how prices are increasing, consumers are spending less. So the best way around these negative factors is identifying ways for businesses to save money. A great way to save money and become more efficient at the same time is through outsourcing some or all IT needs to a managed service provider. You'll hear me say managed service provider, referred to as MSP too, just in case you don't know that acronym. But as for why, there's a multitude of reasons. So let's say you're an in-house IT resource, has a $65,000 salary. That cost is actually closer to around $85,000 when you factor in things like benefits, 401k, paid leave. And the time you get out of those employees is 40 hours a week, less the PTO, holidays, sick days. Whereas with an MSP, you have access to an entire team of technicians, typically 24/7, 365. So that's regardless if it's after business hours, on weekends, or during holidays. Employee retention is another thing to think about there. If they quit, or if maybe they lied about their experience on their resume, you got to think about the cost and the time that goes into recruiting, interviewing, hiring, onboarding, training, and the continuous management. And again, a team of experts offer much more bandwidth and experience than a single hire. With an MSP, you get proactive monitoring, backup solutions, ticket tracking systems, vendor resources, macro experience beyond knowledge of a single network or a coding language, as you'd see with a single individual hire, and so much more. And I think this is also a good time to think about what tasks an internal IT member could offload to an MSP so that they can utilize some of these resources I just mentioned and focus on what's more important to them and their roles and responsibilities. And typically, you'll see that an MSP can do all of these things mentioned at the same cost or substantially less than what you pay for a single internal IT resource.
Thank you for that insight, Jake. And I would say that this kind of approach is applicable to quite a number of industries as it pertains to services, in-house versus outsource versus supplement. It's a question that's going through a lot of our minds as we're trying to better prepare our business and become more efficient and agile. And with that, I would like us to transition to kind of an operations discussion. So Kelsey, I'm going to toss this over to you first. Your background is in operations management. So how can businesses prepare in this aspect?
I'd say the name of the game in operations is always do more with less. And there's no better time to do that with either, depending on what camp you sit in, looming recession or active recession that we're in right now. And so I think there are several levers that companies can think through, but the first lever, I'd say, simple. You just need to make your spending and inefficiencies visible. You need to have good reporting, have a good pulse on that reporting. You understand which are the right levers to pull, because you don't want to be pulling everything. I think you need to be focused with your efforts. You need to make sure that you're focusing on the right things. So I'd start with make them visible, find what you want to cut. And that goes sort of to the next point, which is find ways to cut costs, but cut costs that are non-strategic costs. So don't go and cut things that are going to impact your employee or customer experience. I think those are the critical investments you want to continue to make, but do look for cutting costs on various discretionary spend. Maybe there's some tools you're using that are not performing as expected. Is there a lower cost alternative? And, I think cutting costs sometimes gets a bad rep or seems like it might not be fun, but I think you can be creative with it. We're doing something at NetGain. We're calling it Budget Bonanza. And so in July, we are going to just go through department by department, P&L line by line, and look for ways that we can, shake the money tree, find more money, and then either reinvest that in our employees and our processes, or just reinvest that as profit. And so I think you can be really creative here. And I certainly think with remote work and our hybrid work, there are ample opportunities to cut costs and think through operational efficiencies.
Yeah, Kelsey, I think speaking to the remote aspect, as companies make that transition either completely or partially to a remote work environment, we're seeing huge cost savings opening up in terms of getting out of expensive leases or just being able to downgrade to a smaller and more affordable lease. And as a business, you can also expand your labor pool by hiring remote staff, which we've been seeing some success here at NetGain, or outsourcing certain departments entirely, as I discussed earlier with an MSP. That doesn't have to mean you're replacing current IT members. It could just mean that instead of growing out an internal team together, you could just work in tandem with an MSP.
Thanks, Jake. I think those are all great suggestions. And I think keeping us moving along, I think the third area, labor costs tend to be 70% of a business's cost. Find ways that you can defer the need to hire by creating very flexible resources or getting creative with how you use labor. And I'm going to say I intentionally use defer the need to hire as opposed to lay off or cut staff. I think oftentimes during recessions, that is a lever that companies pull, but I do think it's short-sighted. It's the lever that is going to, one, impact your morale and also impact the livelihood of those employees. But two, when things get better, you are also going to have to incur the cost for sourcing new employees, training those new employees, who then have to learn your culture, your tools, your processes. And so it can become very costly. Whereas if you can keep your internal team, but flex them from areas of low capacity to high capacity, then you're able to defer the need to hire a new resource who would also have a costly ramp up period. So for instance, at my last company, I had a team of art directors, copywriters, no background in procurement, no background necessarily in customer facing work, but we had a reduction in the number of products being added. And what we found was, we have a need to find ways to expedite products to customers. We have a huge backlog of orders that aren't going out the door because they're tied up in supply chain. So we took my team, trained them, and had them shift over to that procurement team to find ways to expedite those customer orders, contact customers, which overall helped the company, kept those employees, and when our volumes went back up, that team came back to me. And I think it's a great way to instill loyalty from your team members, use resources creatively, and not hire net new resources. Caroline, do you have any examples from NetGain and your experience of how NetGain has done this?
Yeah, most definitely. I can actually speak to personal experience on this. So when we made a shift from solely in person to remote/hybrid, I mean, we had a number of departments that were kind of covering different or new ground. So me, for instance, at the time, I was actually the executive assistant. So everybody went remote, but I was close to our headquarters office. So I would come in and I was dabbling in the finance department a bit. I was dabbling in operations too for like shipping and receiving hardware. So I think, as you've said before, flexibility and agility. And I think being able to kind of get creative with different needs and workloads kind of enabled us to make these shifts fairly seamlessly, and I think also having a positive mindset of like, this might be kind of a wild, transition for us, but we're going to work through it and hopefully things will come out better. And they did. So yeah, you just got to be flexible sometimes and creative, as you said. Mm-hmm.
Okay, definitely being creative with it. I think finding ways when you cross-train employees, I think it also oftentimes is less costly to cross-train someone than train a net new employee, because that person already knows your business. And to your point, Caroline, you were able to successfully do that. So I think those are one way that you can tackle this. I think the other way is, I also know our marketing team has invested in working with interns, and those interns have been very helpful to us to get a lower cost resource, get someone who could become a future member of our team as a full-time member, teach them our business, but keep making progress. And so again, think of creative ways that you can use the labor you have and make it extend farther, rather than hiring additional resources when you know that costs are rising. And I'd say the fourth area to focus on is planning for scalable solutions. And by that, I mean, focus on the products and competencies that your business is really good at. Now is not the time to be focusing on some new product line or taking a big risk or a big bet. Focus on consolidation. So if you have 5 products, look for opportunities to decrease that to 3 and drop your products that aren't doing as well. Look for things that you expect to do well in the future that maybe aren't working well now. So like tactically at NetGain, we see that hardware is really hard to secure, has long lead times, but cloud we're able to deploy immediately. And we also know that there's a future demand for cloud. So for us, that's making us consider and think through, could cloud be an interesting revenue stream for us to invest more in the future? How are we going to evolve our business? What might that transition look like? Do we want to make that transition? So I would say start looking at what are the products that are going to do well, or the services that are going to do well? Are they expected to do well in the future? And if they aren't, what are some of your backup solutions that you can have in place to transition your business to a right mix of products and services that you want? And then I would say the final area I would focus on is automation and investing in technology. I think this is a big one, especially in operations. Technology will always be infinitely more scalable than people, and it's going to help you move the lower value added work away from people so they can focus on the most value added work for your business. So finding ways that you can move tasks from people, and then also just cut costs overall. I think oftentimes technology can become self-funding through the cost savings that you're able to garner through it overall.
Yeah, and on that note, Kelsey, you kind of provided me a seamless transition into our next topic, which is technology. So technology is another aspect of building greater opportunity within a business during recessionary times. So take this quote from a notable financial expert: "I firmly believe the only deflationary force is technology. And technology is now a source, I believe, of sustainable competitive advantage." So Jake, you've worked with several technology companies in some different capacities. How do you think technology can be a differentiator for organizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the more technology you have, the more insight you have into every part of your business. You can take that insight and start tracking and reporting on analytics to find inefficiencies or simply areas for improvement to become more efficient. You can use that data and reports to quickly provide customers with all the information they need to keep them happy. You can monitor the productivity of your own employees. You can communicate quickly with specific individuals or entire teams from your organization, and you can tackle projects, assign tasks. And another factor that I won't even get into, because that could serve as an entirely separate webinar, is how technology affects security. And that's protecting data, confidential, proprietary information, and so much more.
I would definitely agree. We could do a whole conversation about information security, especially in this climate. Definitely a hot topic, but I love this quote from Jim Kavanaugh. I think it, for me, rings very much true. The other day I was reading an article from Harvard Business Review that was talking about the role of technology in recessions. And, I think the really interesting thing is we often see that firms tend to invest more in technology during times of recession. And I think we already know that recessions will lead to differential outcomes between firms. So some firms get ahead and some firms really start lagging. But I think when you add technology into the mix, it's just a catalyst that can either help, or lack of investment in technology can harm your business, and it makes those gaps larger. And so my view is, if you're not investing in technology, you run the risk of getting left behind of many of your competitors in the future. And, and I think sometimes there's this misconception of, well, we don't want to make investments now. Technology can be risky. I can't do this in a cost-conscious manner. But I think a lot of those things you actually can do. And I know, Jake, that you have some experience with technology, thinking through technology planning and doing it in a budget-friendly way. So I'd be curious for what your advice is for investing in technology in a cost-conscious manner.
Yeah, from all the conversations I've had, businesses are really looking for predictability within their costs. One of the benefits to working with an MSP is that typically their pricing is fixed, as their services are primarily subscription-based. This is important when it comes to being able to effectively budget for your business's IT needs. Another benefit is that those subscription-based fees can also scale with the constant fluctuations of your own business, as they're typically billed by the number of users. So if you're hiring or firing employees, that count just reflects, it correlates with the number of users that you're billed for each month. IT road mapping, that's another important service often provided by MSPs, which is worth pointing out because of how costly hardware and IT projects can be. If an MSP can define what future expenditures for a business look like, they can then help them prepare for those costs in advance. The idea here is you can slowly start allocating funds to a project over the next 12 to 24 months. And I'll give you an example. Say you have a server that will reach end of life in 2 years, and end of life means that it's so old that it's no longer supported by the organization that created it. So with IT roadmap planning, you know to allocate budget to that new server in advance versus getting surprised with a huge immediate cost. And you find yourself in a jam, it's no longer supported, something goes wrong, and now you're hoping you have backups and a disaster recovery plan in place to spin up all of your data and files that may now be lost forever. So it can turn negative real quick.
0 to 100 real quick. Oh my goodness. Kelsey, do you have anything to add or suggest about maybe how technology can complement business strategy?
I'd say the key word there is complement. In my mind, sometimes people view technology as a standalone strategy, and I would say it's not. Technology should really just be a tool that enhances your overall business strategy. So everything should flow from that business strategy, and then the technology is about removing roadblocks so that you can focus on delighting your customers, delighting your employees, and finding ways that you can focus on operational efficiencies. And I think that's a way that NetGain or any other IT professionals or technology professionals can help you, is by learning your business, learning your customers, learning how you work, so that technology really becomes a value enhancing tool, as opposed to kind of playing and rolling the dice and trying different solutions without necessarily a strategy involved, and seeing how it connects to your business.
And on that note, I'm going to transition once again, kind of wrap this up in a nice bow for us. So we've talked about how the operations and technology side of opportunities to come, are kind of positioning businesses at almost an impasse of like go or no go, but really the decision is, you've got opportunity out there. So here are some additional takeaways for other opportunities ahead to kind of corral our discussion into a nicer box with a bow, if you will. So Kelsey and Jake both touched on the labor market and how there could be some relief on the horizon as people are looking to find some greater financial stability in difficult economic times, ideally with more consistent work and pay. And this might be a good time to find people who are more likely to stick around instead of shopping around for different jobs and potentially better pay or something. Another thing is like I said, with the housing market, it's also with like landlords and business locations too. Landlords might be more willing to show flexibility towards lease rates for their tenants. They want to keep their places full of people, and you might have some more negotiating power there. And then, Kelsey and Jake both discussed how technology can serve as a competitive advantage. So workplaces have gotten quite creative over the past few years, past couple of years really, to shift their workforce to either a fully remote or a hybrid model. And tech tools have certainly been instrumental in assuring everyone can stay connected and able to collaborate still. So technology is kind of being seen as a less riskier investment too. And on that note, how can NetGain potentially help your business during this time? And I'm going to toss this over to Jake first.
Yeah, I think the main takeaways here are outsourcing some or all of your IT needs, giving your business access to a significantly larger pool of IT and security resources at typically a lower cost. Keep in mind, a single internal member can cost up to $85,000 after you factor in all of those benefits and other things. You have that reliable support all hours of the day, every day of the week versus 8 to 5 on weekdays. You don't have to panic if your IT member gets sick because you have 100 backup technicians at your aid. Our support can be the driver of the car or the passenger helping the driver when needed. We have all sorts of partnerships with our clients where in some cases we handle everything or we just handle what's asked of us. So you can offload all of those confusing and tedious calls with your vendors to us. So you can focus on what's driving your business forward and not what's keeping technology working. You also have experts at your side to advise you on what hardware and software can make your business more efficient, what is needed to keep things up and running. The driving factors to these discussions are focused on how technology interacts with your business, when security is important or even required for your business, and ultimately what's going to minimize downtime to keep your business more efficient.
Kelsey, do you have anything to add here?
I think maybe piggybacking on some of what Jake has said earlier about having predictable costs. I think predictable spend, predictable cost is really critical, especially in times of recession when cash flow is a big focus because most businesses shutter because they have insufficient cash flow. And so it's really helpful to have predictable costs. But another consideration too is we can also help with finding cloud solutions, which will scale with your business size. So you're only paying for what you need, but it also shifts you away from those larger capital expenditures and heavy infrastructure that you might not want to be making during a time of economic uncertainty. And so I think that is a really big benefit to helping you conserve your cash flow. And then I'll just go back to my earlier point about I think NetGain can help by learning your business so that technology becomes a strategy that enhances your business value by learning your business, learning your strategies, learning your customers, so that technology is removing roadblocks for you so that you focus on the most value-added things for your company.
Yeah, I like that. Learning your business, predictable costs, removing roadblocks, anything that will find efficiencies.
Yeah. And on that note, I'm going to take somewhat of a brief pause for our discussion, and I'm going to post a poll to our group and use that pause as an opportunity to review some of the questions that we've had coming in. So I'll launch this. Okay, and take a few seconds for everybody to respond to the poll, please. And we have had a number of questions come in the chat. So I'm going to review them now, and we're going to answer as many as we can in our Q&A time together. A few more seconds. Let me look over in the chat. Few more seconds. I'm scrolling through our questions. Let me see if I can go ahead and kind of organize them a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and we are back on to our normal schedule. So Q&A time. So here is our first question. What if we like internal members, and I feel like they're probably saying internal IT members. So what if we like internal IT members because we always want someone in the office? Jake, I'm going to toss this over to you first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of companies do want someone in their office and then go knock on a door for, so I understand that. Now, we do offer staff augmentation, so that could mean that we're appointing one of our technicians to be dedicated to come on site, whether it's daily, a couple times a week, a couple times a month, or whatever that relationship looks like. One of the things I would kind of counter with that is, I'd say about 97% of the issues that we come across as it relates to tickets coming through to our help desks, we're able to resolve remotely. So it's rare for us to come across an issue where we can't remotely resolve it, which means we're going to be able to resolve it a lot quicker too, where we'd have to actually send someone on site. And typically when we send someone on site, we're prepared for that, and we can set aside a time in advance to get that sorted out, whatever the issue may be. Kelsey, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
I think you've covered it pretty well, though I think the other consideration too is to think about your own labor force as well. Maybe currently everyone is located local to you, but one of the benefits of having a hybrid remote workforce is that you can recruit from potentially lower cost areas of the country. So you might actually have more remote workers, which then necessitates remote support. And I think to Jake's point, in my experience at NetGain and even my previous employer, most of the tech support issues are able to be handled remotely, and there's ability to bring people on site when you need someone on site. And so I think you can still build the rapport. One of the ways we try to structure our operations is around regional pods, so that you have a team that knows you, knows your business. You are able to build some of that rapport with them. It's not just a faceless engineer helping you out. It's someone who has a pulse on your business.
Thank you both for that. Hopefully that kind of covered that question that individual had. I've got another one that came in. Okay, you guys see so much of what is going on across industries. What trends are you seeing in terms of new technologies being deployed? So I don't know who wants to take this first.
I can take a stab at it. I think in terms of new technologies being deployed, one thing that kind of separates MSPs from each other is that they all offer their own different tool sets, their own tech stacks, their own preferred cybersecurity tools. So I think one thing is just every MSP trying to be innovative and research into what's new and what's coming out, and then analyzing that across their own tech stacks and slowly moving out of certain tools that they use to accommodate ones that they think are a little bit more efficient. Kelsey, I don't know if you want to talk about something separate there.
I'd say the biggest trends that I'm seeing are rise of artificial intelligence, either being used as part of platforms that companies can deploy without needing an internal team to actually build those machine learning models, because those are very, very heavy investments to make. And oftentimes those teams, if you have an engineering team, it takes years for that to be profitable. So we're seeing more companies that are starting to build sort of custom solutions, AI solutions like chat boxes or different decision trees or ways that it's going to interpret what your customers are saying or automate your processes using artificial intelligence. So I think that's one of the biggest trends I've seen. The other trends I'm seeing are, again, related to automation, robotic process automation, finding ways to automate transactions, whether those are financial or other transactions in your business. And I think that that theme of automation will continue to be the drum that we're going to beat, that we're going to hear in the coming months and years.
I think another area is, as it relates to security, the government industry. There's a lot of pressure with new compliances. I know CMMC was another one that is having companies start to think about how they can restructure their cybersecurity stance. Not so prevalent right now, but in the coming years it will be. So, you know, government's always a strong industry for pushing new compliances, and that has to allow for companies to adapt into their current methods for how they're handling their cyber stance.
I think cyber is a big one. Oh, go ahead, Caroline.
Go with it. Go with it. Cybersecurity.
If you want to go on cybersecurity, you go first. I have another point that's separate from cybersecurity. So if you have something on cybersecurity, Caroline, feel free to jump in.
I don't. Mine's separate.
Okay. Well, my separate one is the other technology that we're seeing more and more of is blockchain. And I think many people are familiar with that from a cryptocurrency standpoint, but there's many other applications. And essentially, blockchain is a way of securely storing information, which does sort of piggyback on security points Jake is making. But I've seen applications of it for degrees and credentials, so certifications, because you can create blockchain data around what someone's credentials are, and it could be used in ways for hiring to more quickly screen through applicants and also check their credentials automatically. That was something I went to Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. That was something we were exploring with degrees as a way to quickly reference and verify, did this person actually go to Kellogg? And you would get blockchain information that's just tied to you that has all of your academic information coded into it. But you could imagine that there would be many, many more applications of blockchain aside from cryptocurrency or aside from recruiting academic type data.
Very interesting. So my 2 cents on this topic, this is a great question. I feel like we could probably go on an absolute rant with this. This question made me think more of collaborative tools, and I speak on, what I've seen with, some of the companies and clients that we work with, and also like in-house, what we've been experiencing, especially over the past, 2 years, is communication, collaboration platforms. For example, Microsoft Teams. I'm looking back to it was like the end of 2019, early 2020. We had just implemented Teams within NetGain, but we kind of doodled around with it a little bit. It was fairly new. I don't think we'd done too much internal training, but as soon as we shifted into a remote workforce, it was like full speed ahead with Teams, and we delved in, used it for a lot of our, document sharing, communication for chats, video meetings, company meetings. So I think that's been a trend too for a lot of businesses, is looking for ways to create maybe more efficiencies with how they're connecting with coworkers. And this could be, across the world, across the US, and depending upon the collaboration application that you use, a lot of them integrate with other applications too. So you, instead of having say you use Slack for maybe your little side chat discussions with coworkers, and you use like Office 365 for maybe like SharePoints and document file sharing or whatnot. And I'm trying to think of like some other applications too. HubSpot. I'm thinking more internally, but it's nice to be able to have one tool that can sync a lot of these different applications together to where you kind of have everything under like one umbrella. So
yeah, and now that you bring up,
I don't have any, what is it? That was not a sponsored comment for Microsoft Teams, but
we collaboration tools, and also Kelsey pointing out AI. Another thing that I've been seeing a lot is discussions around voice solutions. AI is becoming a bigger factor for different solutions on that end as well, UCaaS in general. Being able to get voice transcriptions of every single word being discussed in a conversation, then there's so much data you can collect from that. You can focus on doing searches for your competitive keywords And then you can get analysis for your own internal teams to study, hundreds of thousands of words and focusing in on only specific aspects of those transcriptions. So that's a good call out too.
I will double tap on what Jake is saying there about, I think the application of how technology can help you have a better pulse on your business using analytics, making data-driven decisions, because you can use those transcripts, whether those are internal calls, external calls, whatever it may be, to find ways that your team members can be more efficient. You can find ways to coach them and create training content and materials that will allow your people, again, do more with less.
Okay, I'm going to close out that question because we've got a couple more that come in that came in that I want to give us a chance to answer. So let me see. I've got one more I'm going to toss out here now. What are the pitfalls for businesses to avoid during a recession? And Kelsey, I'm going to toss this to you because I think you touched on this a little bit earlier in some of your discussions around operations. So what are pitfalls for businesses to avoid during a recession?
I'd say the number one is not focusing enough on cash flow management. I can't stress enough the importance of cash flow management and making sure you have enough cash reserves regardless of fluctuations that you're going to see. And so I'd say that's number one. So make sure that you're focusing on ways of keeping your accounts receivable, like you're staying close to your accounts receivable, you're collecting cash, you're saving things and keeping them in reserve. I'd say the second area is businesses sometimes focus too much on new customer acquisition as opposed to working within their existing customer base and not enough on retention. It's always going to be more expensive to acquire new customers. It is less expensive and less risky to retain your existing base. And so retention is really important. So keep doing the things that delight your customers, work on working within your customer base. Don't stop new customer acquisition, but I would say don't overly focus on new customer acquisition, especially as customers are starting to tighten their wallets and may not necessarily be looking for new business overall. And then I'd say the third pitfall businesses sometimes make is either maintaining their same product portfolio or expanding their product portfolio into sort of newer, more experimental products and services. And again, this is not the time to be taking big risks. This is the time to be doubling down on this is what's working, or this is new technology that is going to make us more efficient. Those are the types of safer bets you can make. You don't want to be focusing on over expanding into areas where it could work, it might not, and the consequences of it not working might be that you don't have a chance to recover overall. Hopefully that answered the question.
I think you covered several great points with that, Kelsey. Jake, is there anything that you want to weigh on for this question?
I think listening to what Kelsey said, there was one piece about customer acquisition and not wanting to spend a lot of money into that. As you're hitting a recession, you might see some slowdown from your current clients or your own outbound activities towards sales. So when you're thinking about how you can obtain new clients and not so much cross-selling or upselling current clients, think about your own internal team. They might be spending less time now because they're not attending to all these outbound resources. So maybe think about how your own internal team can work on organic growth, because there are ways to push new business that doesn't cost money. You don't have to be going into paid advertising or hiring new sales members. You can be doing things like email marketing or working on SEO. So I think it's just what can you do that doesn't cost money that your own internal team members could potentially do to help with that organic growth.
Time to get creative, why not? And to take a look in the mirror too of like, what have we been doing? Has it been going well? Can we do it better? Can we be more efficient and maybe more cost effective too? So on that note, we've got a few minutes left. So you know what, I'll toss out one more question. Any of the questions that we don't cover here, we will follow up with you directly, but I think we can get to this last one. So, okay. The idea of switching from my current IT provider to someone else is terrifying. Oh no, it's terrifying because of the time that goes into those transitions, regardless of how unhappy we are with our provider. So that's kind of more of a statement. So maybe let me try to phrase this as a question. So transitioning to a new IT provider can be difficult. So maybe how could that be simplified, or maybe like put someone at ease for how that can be a more efficient or simple transition? And I'm going to give this one over to Jake first.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is, what's the justification? And that's a really good question. And we'll be the first to tell you, this doesn't seem like a good fit if that's the case, because IT transitions are not easy. I've often referred to them as, think of it as happening to have an out-of-state move without the benefit of using a moving company. It's not easy. It takes time. It takes resources. So really, it comes down to, what are your pain points, and is that enough to justify the time it's going to go into building this new relationship, going through the onboarding process, and what you're going to get out of it. At the same time, I'd say at the bare minimum, have those conversations with an MSP and let them give you, free analysis, free feedback, maybe an assessment into what you're doing now, where there's room for improvement, and how they will handle that, the problems that you have, and what their solution is. So at least at the bare minimum, you're getting insight into, maybe what a company's providing alternatively to what you're doing in-house, how they can, help you out, and maybe any innovative tools that they're doing that are different from what you're currently receiving. So maybe it's not worth the transition. Maybe you should just stick with your current vendor, but have those conversations. That's all I'd say there.
Yeah, it's a great time for conversations. Okay, and on that note, I'm gonna close out our Q&A portion and wrap up our webinar in a nice bow for us. So huge thank you to Kelsey and Jake for all the information and insights they've shared today pertaining to some of these opportunities and challenges the current economy is posing for businesses. Hopefully everyone found this webinar informative and helpful, and you can walk away with some ideas about how to maybe better strategize and position your business and technology for the future. So one last reminder, we are going to be sharing the details around this webinar in an email with a link to the recording, the slide deck, and some additional information too. So look for that to be shared within the next few days. And with that, I will close out the webinar, and I hope everyone has a great Thursday.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks, Jake.
Everyone.
Thanks, Kelsey.